As someone who has been a longtime anti-violence frontline worker, the levels of violence I'm seeing are just quite staggering.
Tonight, remembering those lost in the Polytechnique shooting amid an increase in violence against Indigenous women in Montreal.
We recognize that foreign policy is not within the territorial jurisdiction, but we feel like our federal government has failed us.
A rally in Yellowknife calling for a ceasefire in the Middle East.
Specifically for the folks who are, have had involvement with the justice system, it's really hard for people to get a job.
And a new program in Winnipeg is providing skills training to those who have had trouble with the law. Good evening and welcome to APTN National News. I'm Savannah Kelly. Cities across Canada held vigils December 6th in memory of the women killed in the Polytechnique shooting in 1989. At the vigil in Montreal, missing and murdered Indigenous women were also remembered. Amelia Fournier has more.
Indigenous women, girls, trans, and Two-Spirit people are not just victims of violence.
A handful of people braved a cold Montreal night to honor victims and survivors of gender-based violence in Cabot Square on December 6th, the 34th anniversary of the École Polytechnique massacre in Montreal, where 14 women were murdered.
Each person holds so much life and so much potential.
The vigil was organized by Ishkwe Project, an Indigenous women's support center that also tracks missing and murdered Indigenous women, Two-Spirit, and trans people in Quebec.
We call for an end to all forms of race-based and gender-based violence.
Laura Aguirre of Ishkwe says the amount of violence against Indigenous women in downtown Montreal has increased dramatically in recent months.
As someone who has been a longtime anti-violence frontline worker, the levels of violence I'm seeing are just quite staggering, and we have about 40 women we work with, and almost all are in very dangerous, very highly lethal situations of violence.
During the vigil, Aguirre invited the crowd to honor the missing and murdered Indigenous women in Quebec as well.
Stephanie Kitchen, Rangi Tukai.
Between August 23, 2023 to November 8, 2023, Ishkwe recorded 13 missing persons cases, 5 hostage situations, 6 human trafficking cases, 8 sexual assaults, 24 intimate partner violence cases, and 1 murder among Indigenous women in downtown Montreal alone. Aguirre says homeless Indigenous women are even more vulnerable to gender-based violence, particularly with the closure of Chez Doris, the only women's shelter downtown. It shut its doors in September due to staffing shortages.
They're going to more isolated areas like abandoned buildings, alleyways, motels, where there's less contact with people. So that's been really challenging, I think, to navigate, and it's a trend we're seeing as the months get colder.
While Chez Doris is set to reopen December 11th, Aguirre says it's important that other issues like housing affordability in the city are addressed.
A lack of access to financial resources is one of the biggest barriers to leaving a situation of violence. So if your choice is to sleep on the streets when it's December and it's -10, or to stay with an abuser where at least you're going to be warm and you know what that pattern of violence looks like.
Ultimately, Aguirre says that all institutions need to work towards reducing gender-based violence.
I often hear people say well, what is Ishkwe doing to address violence against women, and how are you doing this? What are you doing because these numbers are so high? And it's also okay, but the hospitals have a role too, right? Second stage housing programs, the OMHM, everyone has sort of a part to play, and I think it's important to take accountability for that.
We have our ways to kind of help ourselves.
Emilia Fournier, APTN National News, Montreal.
A Yukon Supreme Court judge has delayed sentencing for the man who pleaded guilty in the 2019 death of Casca woman Mary Ann Oley. 66-year-old Philip Atkinson pleaded guilty to manslaughter in the death of Oley in October. Judge David Gates says the 9.5-year sentence put forward by the Crown and Defense, known as a joint submission, lacks information on Atkinson's background. The judge ordered both parties to provide more information on Atkinson, including a Gladue report and pre-sentence reports. The sentencing has been tentatively delayed until January 24th. Quebec's new language law, commonly known as Bill 96, will take full effect next fall. The legislation requires students attending English junior colleges to complete additional courses in French to graduate. Educators say the law only adds more obstacles to Indigenous students. Maricela Amador has more.
Randall Migwans, a Cree student from Waswanipi, is in his third year at John Abbott College, and he has big dreams for his future.
I plan on becoming a photographer full-time, hopefully, or start my own business, possibly.
Migwans hopes to attend Concordia University in Montreal to pursue a Bachelor's of Fine Arts. The problem? He is still missing the French language requirement to graduate from John Abbott, the junior college located at the western tip of the island of Montreal.
It took me like a while just to get through the first beginner's course. It took me like 3 semesters, and I'm only in the second one. So that because of that, that'll be delaying my graduation too.
And he is not alone. According to Kim Martin, the Dean of Indigenous Education at John Abbott, there are many students in Migwan's situation, and she fears that the new language law will not only make the problem worse, but also have a devastating impact on Indigenous students.
This is a group of students that are underrepresented in post-secondary school, marginalized population, and instead of setting up a path for easy and open access to education, we're actually seeing the opposite, where there's more and more barriers being put in place.
Right now, Indigenous students must complete 2 French second language courses to get their college diploma. However, before taking the 2 credited courses, Indigenous students must first take a placement test and, based on proficiency, complete 1 to 3 preparatory classes. Come September 2024, they will also be required to pass 3 additional program courses in French.
The way that this bill is being put forward, I don't think that there was a lot of thought put into Indigenous students and how this would impact us. And also the fact that a lot of our students, they already need an enormous amount of support.
Martin said that the only solution would be for Indigenous students to be completely exempt from the law. Seven Diamond moved from her Cree community of Oje-Bougamou to attend John Abbott in 2022. She said that leaving her community behind, coupled with the transition to college, was very difficult.
I have been learning French since grade 1, grade 2. So that's 11, 12 years. And I still couldn't, doing the placement test, couldn't get into the credited French course.
Both Diamond and Migwans noted that some of their friends are contemplating leaving Quebec because of the law.
It's so difficult to have all these different levels of language learning that you have to know. And I can imagine that for other students that this is also really hard, and they're pushing their students away by doing this.
Francesca Roy is a French teacher at Dawson College in downtown Montreal. For years, she has been working closely with Indigenous students at Dawson's transition program. She said Quebec's language law is hurting reconciliation and emphasized that most Indigenous students who arrive at college are not equipped to successfully complete the 3 additional program courses in French.
Ils ont très peu d'exposition au français. Ils en ont à l'école, mais quelques heures par semaine à l'école, c'est pas suffisant pour qu'il y ait une acquisition. Donc, pas beaucoup d'exposition. Ensuite, le français, c'est pas la langue la plus facile à apprendre comme langue seconde.
Roy added that every effort must be made to assist Indigenous students to succeed. Migwans, for his part, said that he will keep going until he gets his college diploma.
I'm just glad I don't have to do a French exit exam, or I don't have to do an extra French course to graduate.
Maricela Amador, APTN National News, Montreal.
We need to step aside for a break. Coming up, a rally in Yellowknife urges the Canadian government to call for a ceasefire and restoration of basic services in Gaza. Welcome back to APTN National News. The war between Israel and Hamas is pushing the humanitarian system in Gaza towards collapse. The death toll continues to climb, surpassing 17,000. In Yellowknife, a demonstration for a ceasefire is underway. Cries of "Stop funding genocide, ceasefire now," and even a heartfelt poem can be heard in front of the Legislative Assembly of the Northwest Territories. More than 40 demonstrators are hoping to show the newly elected MLAs that they are steadfast in their call for a ceasefire. They're urging Canadian leaders to call for the restoration of basic services and unhindered access for humanitarian aid. While there's been several rallies over the last month, today is the first sitting of the new government, so protesters are hoping their demands are addressed quickly.
We recognize that foreign policy is not within the territorial's jurisdiction, but we feel like our federal government has failed us. Trudeau has not spoken up for a ceasefire. People in the streets want it, citizens want it. We need a louder voice. If the citizens' voice are not enough, we're hoping that MLAs can also pass along that message to the federal government.
Fish farms have always been a contentious issue in British Columbia. Recently, there was a group in Ottawa speaking in favor of open net salmon fish farms. Here to talk more about that is Bob Chamberlin with our Tina House. Tina?
Thank you. Since 2012 and the Cohen Commission, salmon have been on a serious decline here in BC. Joining me tonight is Bob Chamberlin. Bob, you've been advocating for salmon and fisheries for Indigenous nations right across up and down the coast. What's the state of affairs right now for salmon?
Well, the salmon are in serious decline. And to understand it, in the DFO's fish farm transition planning process, they acknowledge that in their most recent report, that there is need for bold action to safeguard Pacific salmon. And what I want people to understand is this fish farm transition planning process is a consultation with First Nations across the province. And when you use the word consultation, of course, you have to use the word accommodation. And so what it is how do you accommodate Aboriginal rights across the province? Because the migratory nature of salmon is these fish that come from the backbone of British Columbia are going to be affected and impacted and die at fish farms up on the coast. So the minister is faced with a challenge here, that she needs to be able to look at the true state of Pacific salmon, which DFO acknowledges in a sustained decline, and take the bold actions. And it's not as bold as one might think. When you look at the 9 science risk assessments from the Canadian Science Advisory Secretariat, that process has been torn to shreds at the most recent FOPO report, the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. And so there's zero credibility for the work that is coming from there. So you have science from the department that's horribly slanted, industry influenced every step of the way, and if you don't accept that, you can look at all the peer-reviewed, truly peer-reviewed international science that clearly shows there's an impact. So we have 2 previous DFO ministers that have embraced the precautionary principle and made the right decision for wild salmon. And we need this minister to move beyond the pro-fish farm rhetoric of core territorial decision-making. And the latest one that I've heard is economic reconciliation. This has no foundation in law. But certainly the Supreme Court has been very clear on the consultation process, the accommodation of Aboriginal rights, and the Crown's duty in those regards. So I think we need to see strong decisions made for wild salmon first.
And what does this mean for Indigenous nations right up and down the coast that can no longer get food fish that they're normally used to getting? What does it mean for those nations that they can no longer access that salmon?
Well, we're talking about food security for First Nations across the province. We're seeing the provincial government step up like never before for rehabilitation efforts and so forth, working with the federal government. But what we need to do is realize if we just try to get more fish out of the river into the ocean and we don't do something about the fish farms, it's going to be like trying to pump more gas through the fire. It's not going to work. And so if we want to make good use of the investment of public funds to rehabilitate salmon, we have to look for every measure protection that we can grab hold of and change today. And that opportunity on open net cage fish farms is right now.
Absolutely. Bob Chamberlin, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for sharing your insight with us.
Well, thank you.
Back to you in studio.
We need to take one more quick break. When we come back, a new 6-month training program in Winnipeg is giving construction skills to those with a difficult past. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. If you are anywhere near Mayo, Yukon just the other night, you may have seen the nighttime sky and saw something like this. Millie Olson sent in a great photo of the night sky. Thank you so much for sharing, Millie. If you would like to be our next photo of the day, send your photos to share@aptn.ca. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting off on the east coast, 3 degrees and snow in St. John's, sunshine, 2 degrees in Charlottetown. Nain, sunshine, -1, Le Grand River, +1. Val-d'Or, rainy and 5 degrees, Saguenay, -2. Ottawa, mix of sun and cloud, 1 degree there, North Bay, rainy and 6. Timmins, rainy, 5 degrees there, Sioux Lookout, snow, -9. Churchill, -16 and sunshine there, The Pas, -6. Barons River, -5, Dauphin, sunshine, -3. Swift Current, sunshine, -3 there, North Battleford, -4. Stony Rapids, snowy and -9, Buffalo Narrows, sunshine, -9. -10 in Peace River, sunshine and -6 in Fort McMurray. Edmonton, sunshine, -2, Medicine Hat, -1. Tofino, rainy and 8 degrees there, Quesnel, -2. Fort Nelson, -15, Prince Rupert, rainy and 7 degrees. Beaver Creek, -26 there, Rock River, -22 and sunny. Fort Simpson, -11, Norman Wells, -19 and snow. Polytechnique, snowy there, -14, Fort McPherson, -19. Cambridge Bay, snowy, -15, Baker Lake, snowy there as well. Arctic Bay, snowy, -21, Igloolik, -19. Well, get your tool belts ready. A new 6-month training program in Winnipeg is giving construction skills to those with a difficult past. Sav Jonza went to the job site to hear more.
A paid training program for Indigenous people on employment and income assistance who've been involved in the justice system is changing lives. Purpose Construction, a Winnipeg nonprofit, is providing the on-site experience. Sarah Atnikov is their casework and communications person.
Specifically for the folks who are, have had involvement with the justice system, it's really hard for people to get a job. A lot of places do criminal record checks, or there's just sort of a stigma around it. It doesn't necessarily matter if you did something when you were a teenager or if you did something, last year. So we want to provide opportunities for folks because we don't think that it is necessarily what they've done, but what they can do.
Participants learn how to build homes with their own 2 hands.
There's a drywalling division, there's a repair division, siding division, and the framing division. So there's a lot of places that I could learn new skills at in the program.
The homes go back to community as affordable housing. Michael Hatomany is currently working in Winnipeg's North End on a 3-suite unit for Indigenous women with children and youth aging out of foster care.
It's something I could actually be proud of and something I could actually tell my kids about instead of, every other year getting locked up, spending time in jail, and hiding the fact from my children of where I am. And now I get to go home and see my kids every day and get to tell them about what I'm doing and being excited, knowing that I don't have to hide my life no more.
He says seeing something through from start to finish gives him a great sense of pride.
All you need is just people willing to give you the time.
For Wolf Swan, finding an outlet to occupy their time was important for maintaining sobriety.
To me, it feels like, I did so much wrong in my life, and I'm very grateful because as a teenager, this is something that I wanted to do before I took that other path to drinking, doing drugs, and involving my life into gang affiliation, which was me not being grateful and making mistakes in my life.
Swan wants to bring what they've learned back to their reserve of Manitoba First Nation.
I have such more meaning and so much more purpose, and that I'm learning actual skills that I can carry that out for a lifetime. And it's going to continue to give me that purpose and that meaning that I'm doing something that I really want to do. by giving back to the community, that makes me feel really good.
The program offers wraparound supports like resume writing and cultural components like smudging and sweats. Though purpose construction may be changing lives, Atkinov says it's the trainees who truly make the program great.
Like managers kind of think we do our stuff, but it is so much more about the people who show up every day and who don't have the same access to opportunities that you or I or other folks might, but that they've made the decision that they want to sort of go in a different direction, and that's really scary and that's really big, and I don't think people get enough credit for it. So I think the thing that I'm the most proud of is the folks who are in our program.
Sav Jonesa, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
APTN Investigates returns tonight with an all-new episode. Reporter Carly Schogner looks into the disappearance of a young Gwich'in and a Nunavut man. This past spring, 30-year-old Frank Grubin vanished without a trace from the small town of Fort Smith, Northwest Territories. His disappearance has sparked concern over how the territory handles missing persons cases. With more on the story, we are joined now by Carly Schogner. Carly, what are we going to see on APTN Investigates this week?
Yes, so we are delving into the disappearance of Frank Grubin, who is a Gwich'in and Nunavut man from Aklavik in the Western Arctic. He went to school in Fort Smith and he disappeared, and it's been 8 months and people don't have answers, and the police keep saying there is no signs of foul play, but we also don't have missing persons legislation. So we delve into that and then what is the call for that.
And how has Frank Grubin's disappearance affected people in the region?
Oh, deeply, deeply. People have put his face as their profile pictures. I go to the library. I talk to the homeless population here. They have memories of him. Frank was just so known and bubbly, and it's devastating to people.
And have you come to any conclusions about what needs to be done to improve the system when people go missing in the N.W.T?
Yeah, there's been a lot of from this calls to action from community members, particularly around the better communication from RCMP, from legislature. There's been a lot of rumors. The families filed a formal complaint against the RCMP from the lack of just how they've been not supported, but also the conversation on search and rescue. There is a conversation that search and rescue hasn't formally, where there was nothing official, and even though they was told that they don't have the mandate, there is a greater conversation that this needs to happen, but also in the conversation of greater protection for LGBT community members. There is definitely a feeling that the family have that he might have been targeted for his sexuality and just greater for acceptance within the communities.
Well, we'll have to leave it there, Carly, but thank you for taking some time for us today and looking forward to seeing the full story tonight.
Queen Aini, hi Joe.
You can watch APTN Investigates the disappearance of Frank Grubin a few minutes from now following the APTN National News. And that's all the time we have for you this evening on APTN National News. From all of us here, Marcy, me, Gwitch, and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Savannah Kelly. Take care. Have a great night.